My future mother-in-law laughed about using me for money, so I made sure she'd never exploit me again. I'm 32 years old, and in just a few weeks, I'm set to marry the love of my life, Emily, 31. We've been together for 2 years now, and I can honestly say I've never met anyone as incredible as her. I can't wait to start our life together. We come from completely different worlds. I was raised in a working-class family in a small town in Pennsylvania. My parents worked tirelessly just to make ends meet. My dad was a mechanic, and my mom worked at a local diner. Growing up, my siblings and I learned the value of hard work, but money was always tight. Emily, on the other hand, was born into a life of privilege. Her father, Richard, is a successful businessman, and her mother, Margaret, is a well-connected socialite. Emily attended the best private schools, spent her summers vacationing in Europe, and never had to worry about finances. Despite this, she never took her upbringing for granted. She worked hard, built her own career, and never let wealth define her character. The first time we met was at a charity event hosted by a mutual friend. I remember thinking she was way out of my league, but to my surprise, we hit it off immediately. What started as casual conversation quickly turned into deep, meaningful discussions. She wasn't just another rich girl with a trust fund. She was intelligent, kind, and down-to-earth. Over time, our relationship grew stronger. Emily never cared about the differences in our backgrounds, and neither did I. We supported each other, built a life together, and after 2 years, I finally proposed. She said yes without hesitation. Despite our love, I knew there would be challenges ahead, particularly when it came to her family. While Emily embraced my world with open arms, her parents, especially her mother, weren't as welcoming. And as our wedding day approached, the tension only grew worse. When our relationship became serious, Emily decided it was time for me to officially meet her parents. I knew how important this moment was, so I made sure to dress well, bring a thoughtful gift, and prepare for any tough questions they might throw my way. I wanted to make a good impression, especially knowing how different our backgrounds were. Her father, Richard, was surprisingly welcoming. He shook my hand firmly, asked about my work, and seemed genuinely interested in my ambitions. He appreciated that I had worked my way up from nothing and made a name for myself in my field. It felt like, despite our differences, he respected me as a man. Margaret, on the other hand, made it immediately clear that she was not impressed. From the moment I walked into their lavish home, I felt her cold, evaluating gaze. She barely acknowledged my greeting and only forced a polite smile when Emily introduced me. Throughout dinner, she found every opportunity to belittle me. She interrupted me mid-sentence, dismissed my opinions, and made passive-aggressive comments about how some people don't understand the responsibilities of high society. She even made a snide remark about how I must have been overwhelmed by the luxury of their home. It was uncomfortable, but I did my best to remain composed. I wasn't going to let her get to me. Emily, sensing the tension, held my hand under the table and tried to steer the conversation away from anything that would give her mother more ammunition. The stark contrast in how our families treated each other became even clearer when Emily met my parents. My mom and dad adored her from the start. They welcomed her with open arms, treated her like family, and even joked that she still had time to change her mind before marrying me. It was a warm, loving atmosphere, the complete opposite of the cold reception I had received from Margaret. As time went on, I tried to win Margaret over, hoping she would come around. But no matter what I did, she remained distant, condescending, and disapproving. It was obvious she didn't think I was good enough for her daughter, and she wasn't afraid to make that known. About a year after I first met Emily's parents, tragedy struck. Her father, Richard, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. It was a devastating loss for Emily, and even though my relationship with Margaret was strained, I still felt for her. Losing a spouse after so many years together had to be heartbreaking. Richard had always seemed like a man who had everything under control, so we were all shocked when financial issues started surfacing after his death. Despite his business success, it turned out he had accumulated significant debts that had been hidden behind the family's luxury lifestyle. Creditors started coming after Margaret, and within months, she was forced to sell their home, expensive cars, and anything else of value just to settle the outstanding accounts. With nowhere else to go, Margaret had no choice but to move in with us. Emily didn't hesitate to offer her a place to stay, and though I wasn't thrilled about the idea, I supported my fiancé's decision. Margaret had lost everything: her husband, her financial security, her home. I couldn't imagine how hard that must have been. The least we could do was give her a safe place to stay while she figured things out. However, any hope that this situation might bring us closer quickly disappeared. Margaret remained as unpleasant as ever. Instead of showing gratitude for our hospitality, she constantly criticized our home, complaining that it was too small, too modest, too different from what she was used to. She never missed an opportunity to remind us how much better her life had been before, making it painfully clear that she saw staying with us as a massive downgrade. On top of that, she made sexist comments almost daily. She scoffed whenever I helped Emily with household chores, making remarks like, "A real man shouldn't be in the kitchen," or "Back in my day, men provided and women took care of the home." I tried my best to ignore her, but it was exhausting. No matter how much we did for her, she acted as if she was doing us a favor by staying in our home. I had welcomed her into my house out of respect for Emily, but Margaret's behavior was making it painfully clear she didn't respect me at all. That a few months after Margaret moved in, I got a well-deserved promotion at work. It was a huge step forward in my career, something I had worked tirelessly for. Emily and I decided to celebrate with a party at our home, inviting close friends and family to mark the occasion. We wanted it to be a fun, intimate gathering, good food, great company, and a night to enjoy how far we had come. Margaret, however, had other ideas. Without even asking, she invited several of her wealthy friends, women she hadn't seen much since Richard passed away. She saw this as an opportunity to reconnect with her high society circle, even though she was now living under my roof. At first, everything seemed fine. The house looked great, thanks to Emily's planning, and the guests were enjoying themselves. I was too busy catching up with my friends and colleagues to pay much attention to Margaret, who had settled into a corner with her friends, sipping wine and chatting away. At one point, I ran out to pick up some more wine. When I returned and stepped inside, I heard loud laughter coming from the other room. Curious, I stopped in my tracks just before entering and overheard Margaret's voice, dripping with arrogance. "Oh, it's been months, and this fool still doesn't realize how much of a favor I did for him by moving in." More laughter. "Honestly, I've got him right where I want him. He's so naive. Just keeps working hard, paying the bills, and thinking he's in control. But let's be real, ladies, this house, this life, it's practically mine. He's just the one funding it." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My blood boiled as I stood there, gripping the bag of wine bottles so tightly that I thought they might shatter. Margaret continued, her voice dripping with amusement. "And once Emily marries him, oh, I'll be set for life. He'll work himself to death, making sure we're both comfortable. Poor thing doesn't even realize it yet." That was it. My patience, my tolerance, everything snapped in that moment. I wasn't about to let this woman sit under my roof, drink my wine, and mock me to her friends like I was some pathetic, clueless idiot. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room. The laughter died instantly as every pair of eyes turned to me. Margaret's smug expression froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. I was done being used, and I was about to make that very, very clear that as I stepped into the room, the air turned thick with tension. Every conversation died. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Margaret froze, her wine glass still delicately perched in her hand, but her expression gave her away: shock, guilt, and just a hint of fear. She knew. She knew I had heard everything. I set the bag of wine down on the table, my movements slow and deliberate. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to yell. I didn't need to. My voice was firm, steady, and cold. "I heard every word you just said, Margaret." Her lips parted slightly, and for a second, she looked as if she might deny it. But there was no way out. "I took you into my home. I made sure you had a place to stay when you lost everything. I treated you with respect, despite how you've treated me since the day we met. And this is how you repay me? By sitting here, drinking my wine, laughing with your friends about how I'm some naive fool who will work to fund your life." Silence. Margaret swallowed hard. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly avoiding eye contact. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and they wanted no part in it. Emily appeared at my side. She must have heard enough, because her face was pale, her hands clenched into fists. "Mom, please tell me this isn't true." Margaret's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time, she looked truly cornered. Then, her expression hardened. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, trying to regain control. "I was joking, just having some fun with my friends. You're overreacting." I shook my head. "No, Margaret, you weren't joking. You meant every word." Emily turned to her mother, her voice trembling. "How could you? After everything Adam has done for you?" Margaret scoffed again, but couldn't hide the panic creeping into her voice. "I was just venting. I didn't mean anything by it." I took a step closer. "You're done here, Margaret. You have until tomorrow morning to pack your things and leave. But you're not staying another night in my house." Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged. "Maybe one of your wealthy friends will take you in. After all, you seem to enjoy entertaining them tonight." Margaret looked around, but none of her so-called friends offered so much as a sympathetic glance. Emily sighed heavily, her disappointment evident. "You crossed the line, Mom, and Adam has every right to ask you to leave." Margaret's face twisted with anger, but she had no fight left. She had lost, and she knew it. Margaret stood in stunned silence, her face shifting from disbelief to indignation. "You can't be serious," she muttered, looking from me to Emily as if waiting for one of us to back down. Emily crossed her arms. "He is serious, Mom. And honestly, after what you said, I don't blame him." Margaret let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Unbelievable. After everything I've been through, this is how you treat me? I lost my husband, I lost my home, and now you want to throw me out like trash." I exhaled sharply, already exhausted by her deflection. "No, Margaret. I gave you a home. I gave you support. You lost those things because of your own actions, not mine." She turned to Emily, desperation creeping into her voice. "Sweetheart, you can't seriously be okay with this. This is your fiancé talking to me like this. Your own mother." Emily's jaw tightened. "You did this to yourself, Mom. You disrespected Adam. You used him. You humiliated him in front of your friends while living under his roof. You can't expect us to just ignore that." Margaret's eyes darted around the room, searching for sympathy, but no one was willing to give it. With a frustrated huff, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For a moment, there was silence. Then, I felt Emily's hand slip into mine. "I'm sorry it came to this," she murmured. "Me too," I admitted. Margaret moved in with a distant cousin, but she wasn't about to go quietly. Within days, she began flooding Emily's phone with guilt-tripping messages. "I hope you're happy. You let him turn you against your own mother. I lost my husband, and now I've lost my daughter too. You've abandoned me in my time of need. You think he loves you? Just wait until he turns on you too." Emily blocked her number. Then the messages started coming to me. I didn't even bother reading them. I forwarded them straight to spam. Of course, word spread fast among the extended family. A few relatives, mostly the ones who barely knew the full story, called me out for humiliating Margaret and disrespecting my future mother-in-law. "You didn't have to embarrass her in front of everyone." That was still Emily's mother, no matter what she said. But the people who mattered, Emily, my close friends, even some of Margaret's own family members, stood by me. She had it coming. You did the right thing. She played stupid games and won stupid prizes. Emily and I agreed on one thing. Margaret had no one to blame but herself. That I, in the days following Margaret's departure, I found myself wrestling with doubts. Not about Emily, I loved her deeply, but about what marrying into her family might mean for my future. Margaret had proven just how manipulative and entitled she could be. Even after being exposed for her behavior, she refused to take accountability. What if she tried to interfere in our marriage down the line? What if Emily, despite her firm stance now, eventually gave in to her mother's pressure? I didn't want to enter a marriage with lingering uncertainties. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I took a deep breath and turned to Emily. "I need to talk to you about something important," I said carefully. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and I realized that I need some reassurance going into our marriage. Emily frowned slightly. Reassurance about what? I hesitated before continuing. I want us to sign a prenup. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I worried I had offended her. But instead of getting upset, she simply nodded. That makes sense, she said. I blinked. It does. Of course, she replied, taking my hand. I know my mother's behavior shook you. I hate that it made you question us, but I want you to feel secure in this marriage. I'm not with you for money or comfort or anything other than the fact that I love you. If a prenup helps prove that to you, I'll sign it today. Her immediate acceptance caught me off guard. I had expected at least some resistance, but she didn't hesitate for a second. That night, we went over the details with a lawyer. The agreement was simple. Whatever we built together would belong to both of us, but what we had before marriage remained our own. By the time we both signed, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't about money. It was about trust. Emily's willingness to sign without hesitation reaffirmed what I had always known deep down. She wasn't like her mother. And that made me even more certain that I was marrying the right person. That a few days after Emily and I finalized the prenup, I was beginning to feel a sense of peace. The wedding was just around the corner, and I was more confident than ever in my decision to marry her. That's why, when the doorbell rang late one afternoon, I wasn't expecting trouble. But the moment I opened the door and saw Margaret standing there, I knew this wouldn't be a pleasant visit. She stood on my doorstep, arms crossed, eyes burning with resentment. Before I could say anything, she stormed past me into the house. This has gone on long enough, she declared, her voice laced with anger. I sighed, closing the door behind her. Margaret, what are you doing here? She turned to face me, her expression full of manufactured pain. You've taken my daughter away from me, she accused. You poison her against me. She barely even speaks to me anymore, and it's all because of you. I let out a sharp breath. Margaret, Emily is an adult. She makes her own decisions. You have no one to blame but yourself. Oh, don't give me that, she snapped. You manipulated her, turned her against her own mother. Do you know how much I've sacrificed for her? And now, after everything, she won't even let me live in my own daughter's home. Before I could respond, Emily appeared in the hallway, her expression unreadable. Mom, you need to leave, she said firmly. Margaret's face softened as she turned to her daughter. Sweetheart, you can't just abandon me like this. I'm your mother. Family takes care of each other. Emily crossed her arms. Family also treats each other with respect. You didn't respect my fiancé. You insulted him, used him, and humiliated him in front of his friends. You've never once apologized. Margaret's mouth opened and closed as if searching for an excuse. I took a step forward. Margaret, this is the last time I'll say leave. If you don't, I'll call the police. She gasped. You wouldn't dare. I pulled my phone from my pocket and started dialing. Try me. Margaret's face twisted with fury, but she finally turned and stormed out. As the door slammed shut, I let out a long breath. Emily reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. You did the right thing, she whispered. And for the first time in weeks, I truly felt like we had taken control of our lives again. That a few months passed, and the wedding day finally arrived. Despite all the chaos leading up to it, Emily and I were excited to start this new chapter together. We had planned a beautiful ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. As expected, Margaret refused to attend. She didn't even acknowledge the wedding, despite receiving an invitation. At first, Emily was hurt, but as the day went on, it became clear that her absence was a blessing in disguise. Without her there, the celebration was filled with nothing but joy, love, and laughter. The ceremony was perfect. Emily looked breathtaking as she walked down the aisle, and when we exchanged our vows, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right decision. Our reception was just as incredible, dancing, heartfelt speeches, and a night filled with happiness. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. After the wedding, Emily and I settled into our new routine as husband and wife. We focused on building a life together, full of love, mutual respect, and understanding. However, the events of the past year had left their mark on me, and I realized I had a lot of emotional baggage to unpack. That's when I made the decision to start therapy. Talking to a professional helped me process the hurt and resentment I had carried for so long. It allowed me to see that while Margaret had been cruel, she was also a deeply flawed person struggling with her own demons. More importantly, therapy helped me set healthier boundaries, not just with her, but in all aspects of my life. After some time, Emily and I discussed the possibility of giving Margaret another chance. She was still her mother, and despite everything, Emily wanted to leave the door open for reconciliation. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let her back into our lives, but I agreed to take it one step at a time. For now, I was content. I had a loving wife, a strong support system, and a fresh start. Whether or not Margaret chose to be a part of our lives moving forward was up to her. But this time, I knew I had the strength to protect my peace. No matter what, a few months after our wedding, Emily approached me with an idea. She wanted to invite her mother over for dinner, a chance to talk, to clear the air, and possibly rebuild their fractured relationship. At first, I was hesitant. Margaret had caused so much turmoil in our lives, and I wasn't sure I wanted to reopen that door. But I also saw how much Emily loved her mother, despite everything. She wasn't asking me to forgive and forget, just to give Margaret the opportunity to own up to her mistakes. After some thought, I agreed. On the evening of the dinner, I wasn't sure what to expect. When Margaret arrived, she seemed nervous, almost unsure of herself. There was no trace of the arrogant, controlling woman I had once known. Instead, she looked humbled, even vulnerable. As we sat down to eat, there was an awkward silence at first. But after some small talk, Margaret finally took a deep breath and spoke. "I owe you both an apology," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was cruel, unfair, and downright awful to you, and I regret every bit of it." She went on to explain that after her husband's death, she had felt lost, scared, and completely alone. In her desperation to cling to a sense of stability, she had taken out her frustrations on me, seeing me as a threat rather than as someone who had tried to help. I convinced myself that if I pushed hard enough, I could keep control over my life. "But all I did was push you both away," she admitted. Emily squeezed my hand under the table, silently asking me to respond. I took a moment before speaking. "I appreciate the apology, Margaret," I said, my tone firm but calm. "I understand that you were going through a difficult time, but that doesn't excuse the way you treated me. I won't allow you to manipulate me ever again." Margaret nodded, looking down. "I don't expect you to forget what I did, but I do hope that, in time, we can move forward." I wasn't sure if we would ever have a perfect relationship, but for Emily's sake, and maybe for my own, I was willing to try. That night, we didn't solve everything, but it was a step in the right direction. We agreed to take things slowly, keeping in touch but maintaining boundaries. Margaret was no longer a part of our household, but she was taking responsibility for her actions. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real, and for the first time, I felt like we had finally started turning the page.